Nobody leaves my table hungry. She said it quietly, no drama, no performance, just a 38-year-old waitress standing in a crowded Arizona diner, tearing an $89 receipt in half, while her manager's face turned red behind her. Six enormous bikers stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Because in that single moment, Ashley Carter didn't just pay a bill she couldn't afford. She set something in motion that would shake an entire town, expose a criminal, and change her life forever. If this story moves you, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The breakfast rush at Mesa Road Diner had already chewed Ashley Carter up and spit her back out by 11 o'clock that morning, and it wasn't even noon yet. She had been on her feet since 5:30. Her lower back had started its familiar protest somewhere around 8, that dull grinding ache that no amount of ibuprofen ever fully touched anymore. Her left shoe had a small tear along the inner sole that rubbed a blister on her heel every time she pivoted, which in a diner the size of a school gymnasium was roughly every 45 seconds. She hadn't eaten anything except half a granola bar she'd found in her apron pocket from the day before. She hadn't had a full night of sleep in 11 days. But she was smiling. That was the thing about Ashley Carter that nobody at Mesa Road Diner ever quite understood. Not her coworker Brenda, who'd worked the counter for 6 years and had long since given up on smiling at strangers. Not the cook Ramon, who communicated mostly through grunts and the sharp ring of the service bell. And certainly not Gary Pruitt, the diner's manager, who stood behind the register like a man permanently waiting for something to go wrong. Ashley smiled because she had decided somewhere in the wreckage of the last 3 years that smiling was the one thing left that cost her nothing. Everything else had a price tag on it. The house her father had left her 3 months behind on the mortgage. The pickup truck she drove 40 minutes each way to work, making sounds under the hood that she'd been trying not to think about. The hospital bill from her father's final 6 weeks still sitting in a drawer in the kitchen, because opening it felt like losing him all over again. She was 38 years old, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the double shifts. But she was smiling. Ashley, Brenda leaned over the counter and lowered her voice. You've got a situation coming through the door. Ashley turned. 6 of them walked in. She had lived in Red Mesa long enough to know what a Hell's Angels patch looked like. She had grown up watching the occasional rider come through town on the way to somewhere else, leather-clad and road-worn drawing stairs, from the kind of people who judged a book entirely by its cover. She had never been one of those people, partly because her father had raised her better, and partly because she had learned early that the most dangerous-looking people often carried the most invisible weight. These 6 men were carrying something heavy. She could see it before they even sat down. It was in the way they moved, not with the swagger she might have expected, but with the careful, deliberate steps of men who were holding themselves together through sheer will. Their faces were weathered and hard, the kind of faces that had seen 100 highways and twice as many hard nights. But their eyes were the eyes of people who had recently buried someone they loved. She knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror every morning for the past year and a half. They took the large corner booth without asking. The diner had a few other customers, a retired couple by the window, 2 construction workers at the counter, a young mother trying to manage a toddler in a high chair. Every single one of them went quiet when the 6 men sat down. Ashley didn't hesitate. She picked up her order pad, tucked a pen behind her ear, and walked straight to their table. Good morning, she said, and she meant it. Can I get you all started with some coffee? The man at the head of the table looked up at her. He was somewhere in his 50s with a gray beard that had been recently trimmed and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had the word Duke stitched into the leather above his left breast pocket. He looked at her the way people look at someone when they're trying to figure out if the kindness is real or performed. Coffee'd be good, he said. His voice was low and rough like gravel shifting. Black for all of us, said the man beside him, younger with a tattoo of wings on the side of his neck. He said it almost defensively, like he was daring her to make something of it. Ashley just nodded. Coming right up, she brought 6 cups and a fresh pot. She poured without being asked, refilled without hovering. She gave them the menu and stepped back, giving them room to breathe. At the counter, Brenda sidled up beside her and kept her voice low. Gary's already watching them. Ashley glanced toward the register. Sure enough, Gary Pruitt had shifted his position so he had a clear line of sight to the corner booth. His arms were crossed, his jaw was set. They sat down, Ashley said quietly. They haven't done anything. You know how he gets. I know exactly how he gets, Ashley said, which is why I'm going to take their order before he has a reason to say a word. She walked back to the booth. The 6 men ordered simply. Eggs, mostly. Toast. One of them asked for a short stack of pancakes with a look that suggested he wasn't sure if that was allowed, as if ordering pancakes was an act that required some form of permission. A couple of them ordered water with their coffee. Nobody ordered anything extravagant. Nobody asked for substitutions or special requests. They were trying to take up as little space as possible. That observation settled into Ashley's chest like a stone. She put the order in with Ramon, who gave her a flat look that communicated his feelings on the matter without a single word. She ignored it. She had become very good at ignoring feelings that had nothing to do with her. Table 6, Gary said from behind her. You sure that's a good idea? She turned around slowly, taking their order. You know what I mean. I really don't, Gary. They came in, they sat down, they're ordering food. That's how a diner works. His jaw tightened. Just keep an eye on things. I always do, she said and walked away. For the next 40 minutes, Ashley moved between her tables with practiced efficiency. The retired couple by the window got their second pot of tea without asking. The construction workers got their check. The young mother with the toddler got an extra stack of napkins and a sympathetic smile when the child knocked over a cup of apple juice. Through all of it, Ashley kept one part of her attention on the corner booth. What she noticed was this: the 6 men barely talked. Not the silence of strangers uncomfortable with each other. The silence of people who had already said everything there was to say and were now sitting together simply because being together was the only thing that made any of the pain bearable. One of the younger men, she'd come to think of him as wings for the tattoo, had his hands wrapped around his coffee mug so tight his knuckles had gone pale. Another one, a barrel-chested man with a shaved head, stared at the table between bites like he was reading something written there that no one else could see. Duke ate slowly, methodically, like a man who understood that eating was necessary and was doing it out of obligation rather than hunger. When Ashley swung by to refill their coffee, she made the mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all, of setting the pot down and asking simply and directly, "You folks doing okay?" She didn't mean the food. Duke looked up at her. Something shifted in his expression. "We buried our brother yesterday," he said, "and Ronnie, 22 years riding together." Ashley held his gaze. She didn't say she was sorry because she knew from experience that "I'm sorry" was the phrase people use when they didn't know what else to say, and it almost never helped. Instead, she said, 22 years is a long time to ride with somebody. "It is," Duke said. And then after a pause, something that might have been gratitude moved across his face. "Yeah, it is." She refilled the coffee and moved on. At the counter, Brenda was watching her. "You're going to end up attached," Brenda said, not unkindly. "You always do." "Maybe that's not the worst thing," Ashley said. Brenda sighed. She'd worked long enough to know there was no changing Ashley Carter once she'd decided something. The meal wound down. Plates were cleared. A few of the men leaned back in the booth with a particular exhaustion of people who had been running on fumes and had finally briefly stopped moving. Ashley brought the check when Duke's eyes found hers across the diner. She set it face down on the table the way she always did because she'd always believed there was a certain dignity in not making people stare at what things cost. She walked back to the counter. She was pouring coffee for one of the construction workers. He had come back for a quick refill before heading out when she heard Duke's voice from across the room. It was quiet. It was even. But the diner had a way of carrying voices. "Ma'am," he said, "I need to talk to you." Ashley walked back to the booth. Duke had the check in his hand. He was looking at it the way people look at things that embarrass them. The other 5 men were very still. "I need to be straight with you," Duke said. "We can't cover this." The words dropped into the air of the diner like a stone into still water. Ashley felt the ripple move outward. She heard without looking the shift in atmosphere behind her, Gary Pruitt's footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer. "We had the funeral costs 3 days on the road." Duke set the check down on the table carefully like it was something fragile. "I've got $12 between all 6 of us. I'll leave you every cent of it, but it won't come close to covering the bill. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking if you'll work with us. One of us can stay, wash dishes, whatever you need." Wings spoke without looking up. "We're good for it. We can come back." "Shut up, Marcus," Duke said, not harshly. "Let me handle it." Ashley looked at the check, $89.30. She looked at Duke's face, the dignity there strained but intact. The way he was holding himself, a man who had never once in his life asked for something he hadn't earned, and who was hating every second of this moment. She looked at the five other men, at Wings Marcus, whose hands were still wrapped tight around the coffee mug, at the barrel-chested man who had stopped pretending to look at the table and was now watching her with dark, unreadable eyes, at the youngest one, barely 25, who was looking at the floor like he wanted to disappear through it. She thought about the $89. She thought about what $89 meant to her right now. It was 3 weeks of the minimum payment on the hospital bill. It was the cost of the brake pads her truck needed. It was a number that had weight and consequence and reality. She thought about all of that, and then she picked up the check. "Everything okay over here?" Gary Pruitt's voice came from just behind her left shoulder, close enough that she could feel the pointed intention in it. "Everything's fine, Gary," she said without turning around. "I couldn't help but overhear everything," she said firmly and clearly, "is fine." She held the check in both hands for a moment, and then she tore it in half. The sound was small, a quiet rip in a quiet diner. But in that moment, it seemed to fill the entire room. She heard Gary's sharp intake of breath behind her. She felt the stillness from the corner booth. She was almost certain she heard the retired woman by the window make a small sound that might have been a held breath finally released. "Your brother mattered to you," Ashley said. She looked directly at Duke when she said it because she wanted him to understand she meant every word. "That's enough for me. Nobody leaves my table hungry." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Duke stared at her. Then Marcus stared at her. Then one by one, all 6 men looked at her with an expression she would think about for a long time after, not gratitude exactly, and not surprise exactly. Something older and more fundamental than either of those things. The expression of people who had been seen. Fully and without judgment. Seen. Gary Pruitt grabbed her elbow. "My office," he said. "Now." She went. The office was a small room behind the kitchen that smelled like old coffee and frustration. Gary closed the door harder than he needed to. What he said, "Do you think you just did?" I settled the table. "You gave away $89 of this diner's money without authorization." "I gave away a meal," she said, "to 6 people who buried their friend yesterday. I don't care who they buried." His voice cracked on the word. He stopped, collected himself, lowered his register. "Ashley, I have told you before about this. You cannot make financial decisions that aren't yours to make. This comes out of your next check. That's not a conversation, that's a policy." She met his eyes. "Fine," she said. The word landed between them like something final, not defeated, not angry, simply decided. Gary blinked. He'd been expecting a fight. Ashley had a reputation for pushing back, not loudly but persistently, with the quiet stubbornness of someone who genuinely believed in what they were doing. "Fine," he said back uncertainly. She walked back out into the diner. The 6 men were still in the booth. They hadn't left. Duke stood when she came back through the door. All 6 of them stood, which was something she hadn't expected, and which caused the diner to go very still again. "We heard that," Duke said. "It's fine," Ashley said. "It's not fine." His jaw was tight. "We're not going to let you weigh him. You're not going to stop me," she said gently but absolutely. "What's done is done, and I'd do it again." She paused. "I'm sorry about your brother." Duke looked at her for a long moment. There was something working behind his eyes, something she couldn't quite name but recognized. She'd seen it in her own father's face in the last few weeks of his life when something moved him past the point of words. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ashley." He nodded slowly. Then he reached out and shook her hand. His grip was careful, deliberate, the kind of handshake that meant something. "Duke Harrison," he said. "I won't forget this." She thought he meant it the way people mean things they genuinely intend, but that time and distance eventually erode. She thought he would ride away with his 5 brothers, and that the weight of what he'd just been through would overtake the memory of this diner, this town, this woman who tore up a receipt. She was 38 years old. She had learned not to expect much from the world. She watched them leave. 6 men filing out through the front door of Mesa Road Diner, mounting their motorcycles in the gravel lot engines turning over one by one in the afternoon heat of Red Mesa, Arizona. Duke was the last one out. He stopped at the door for a moment and looked back at her. She lifted a hand, he nodded, and they were gone. Ashley stood at the counter for a moment with the sound of departing engines fading into the desert distance. Brenda came and stood beside her. "You okay?" Brenda asked. "Yeah," Ashley said. She reached under the counter for her order pad. I need to check on table 3. She walked away before Brenda could say anything else. What she didn't let anyone see, not Brenda, not the retired couple still lingering over their tea, not Gary watching from his office door with his arms crossed and his calculations running, was the moment she stopped in the small hallway beside the restrooms and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. $89. She ran the numbers the way she always did, involuntarily, compulsively, the way a person counts their remaining ammunition in the middle of a fight they're not sure they're winning. The mortgage payment, the truck, the hospital bill, the utilities, the groceries, the prescription she'd been rationing because the copay was $40 she didn't have, $89. It was real money. It was gone. She had made the choice deliberately and she did not regret it. But standing in that hallway with the kitchen noise filtering through the wall and her heel blistering in her left shoe, she let herself feel the weight of it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she straightened up, smoothed her apron, and walked back out to the floor. She had tables to cover. She had a life to keep stitching together one shift at a time, one act of ordinary stubbornness at a time, in a small desert town where the summer heat came off the asphalt in waves and nobody ever expected anything remarkable to happen. She was wrong about that last part, but she didn't know it yet. She went back to work. And 140 miles away, Duke Harrison rode in silence at the front of a line of 5 motorcycles, his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the highway ahead, and took out his phone. He didn't make a call. He sent a message. It was short, 7 words and a name, and the name was Ashley. Duke Harrison's message was 7 words long. She paid our bill. Her name's Ashley. He sent it to one contact. That contact forwarded it to 11 others. Those 11 sent it to their chapters. By the time Ashley Carter pulled into her driveway that night, kicked off her left shoe, and examined the raw blister on her heel, Duke's message had traveled through 4 states. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that her feet hurt, her back hurt, and she had 89 fewer dollars standing between her and a mortgage payment that was already 3 weeks past due. She sat on the edge of her father's couch. She still thought of it as her father's couch probably always would, and held her phone without unlocking it. The house was quiet in the way houses get quiet when someone who used to fill them with noise is no longer there to do it. Her father, Carl Carter, had lived in this house for 31 years. He'd raised her here alone after her mother left when Ashley was 9. He'd fixed the porch steps 3 times and always said he'd get to the kitchen faucet eventually, and never did. He died 14 months ago in a hospital bed that cost $1,200 a day, and he'd left Ashley this house and the love he'd poured into every crooked cabinet and every unfinished project in every corner of every room. She was not going to lose this house. She unlocked her phone and opened her bank app, looked at the number, closed it again. Then she set her alarm for 5:15, lay back on the couch without bothering to move to the bedroom, and was asleep in under 4 minutes. She did not dream about motorcycles. She did not dream about Duke Harrison or the look on his face when she tore up that receipt. She dreamed about her father standing in the kitchen trying to fix the faucet saying, "Hand me that wrench, Ash." And she woke up reaching for something that wasn't there. 5:15. She got up. She was back at the diner by 6. Gary Pruitt was already there. He was standing behind the counter with a coffee mug and an expression Ashley recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man who had spent the previous evening preparing what he wanted to say, running it through his head until it felt official. "Sit down, Ashley," he said. "I've got tables to set up." "Sit down." She sat on a counter stool. She kept her apron in her hands. Gary reached below the register and produced a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the counter toward her. She looked at it without touching it. It was a formal written warning. Financial misconduct. Unauthorized absorption of customer charges. The language was stiff and bureaucratic in the way language gets when someone has looked up the right words to make something feel more serious than it is. "I've already noted in your file," Gary said, "that this is your second verbal warning elevated to written status." "I've never had a verbal warning," Ashley said. "The July incident. I gave a free slice of pie to a veteran on the 4th of July, Gary. You said, and I quote, 'Let's not make it a habit.' That's not a warning. That's a comment." His jaw tightened. "The point is one more incident like yesterday, and I have grounds for termination. I want you to understand that clearly." Ashley looked at the paper. She thought about signing it. She thought about what it would feel like to get up and walk out right now, and then she thought about the mortgage and the truck and the hospital bill and her father's kitchen faucet that still dripped if you didn't turn the handle all the way to the left. She picked up the pen Gary had left beside the paper. She signed it. "Good," Gary said. "I need my section," she said. "Tables 4 through 9. You've got 4 through 7 today. Brenda's taking 8 and 9. She stood up without another word and went to set up her tables. Brenda found her at the napkin station 10 minutes later. "I heard," Brenda said quietly. "It's fine. Ashley." "Brenda," she said it softly but completely. "It's fine. I signed it. It's done. Let me work." Brenda watched her for a moment with the particular helplessness of someone who cares about a person who refuses to be saved. Then she picked up a stack of menus and went to her own section. The morning passed. The lunch rush hit. Ashley moved through it with the mechanical grace of someone who had done this so many times that her body knew the rhythms independently of her mind. Pivot, pour, smile, check. Pivot, pour, smile, check. She split her tips into 2 piles at the end of her break, the way she always did. Half for the mortgage fund, half for everything else. The everything else pile was $11.40. She ate half a turkey sandwich standing in the kitchen because she hadn't taken a real lunch break in 6 weeks. "Hey," Ramon the cook set a bowl of soup on the counter beside her without looking up from the grill. "On me." She stared at it. Ramon never gave anything away for free. He had complained audibly when the diner started offering free coffee refills. "Ramon, don't make it weird," he said, still not looking at her. "Eat the soup." She ate the soup. She didn't cry, but it was a near thing. She had learned that kindness, when it arrived unexpectedly and without conditions, hit harder than almost anything else. It was the unconditionality of it that undid her. Not the gesture itself, but the fact that there was nothing being asked in return. She thought about that for a moment, standing in the kitchen with a spoon in her hand. She thought about 6 bikers sitting in a corner booth with $12 between them and a man named Duke who had told her the truth when he didn't have to, when he could have simply walked out. He could have just left, she realized. They all could have. Nobody would have stopped them. But Duke had stayed and told her the truth because, whatever else he was a man who looked people in the eye. She rinsed the bowl and went back to her section. She didn't know, standing there in Mesa Road Diner on a Tuesday afternoon in Red Mesa, Arizona, that at that same moment a man named Carlos Vega was sitting in a parking lot in Tucson, reading a message on his phone and shaking his head slowly. Carlos Vega was the Southwest Regional Communications Director for the Hells Angels. He had been writing for 23 years. He had been to more funerals than he could count, and he had developed over those years a specific and practiced radar for what he called the real ones, the people who didn't perform decency, the people who simply did it. He read Duke's message 3 times. Then he picked up his phone and called Duke directly. "Tell me exactly what happened," Carlos said. "All of it?" Duke told him, calmly, precisely the way Duke told everything. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't editorialize. He told Carlos about walking into the diner, about the woman who came to their table without hesitation, who didn't look at the patches and calculate a risk, who asked if they were okay and meant it, who tore up the receipt and said, "Your brother mattered," without making it a performance. "She lost money out of her own check," Duke said. "The manager took it from her wages. She signed some kind of disciplinary paper this morning, from what I heard." "How do you know what happened this morning?" "Because I called the diner," Duke said simply. "I asked to speak to her, and Gary Pruitt answered and told me she wasn't available, and then said, and I quote, 'Any issues with your bill yesterday should be directed to management.'" Then he hung up. Carlos was quiet for a moment. "He called it an issue," Carlos said. "He called it an issue," Duke confirmed. Another silence. "I'm going to make some calls," Carlos said. "I figured you might," Duke said. What Ashley Carter did not know, could not have known, was that within the Hells Angels community, acts of genuine human dignity, particularly those extended toward members during moments of grief, carried a specific and serious weight. This was not a motorcycle club that forgot things. This was not a community that let debts of honor sit unpaid. And among those debts, the ones owed for how their brothers were treated in their worst moments sat at the very top of the ledger. Carlos Vega made his calls, and the calls moved outward like rings in water. Meanwhile, Ashley's truck chose that evening to make a new sound. It had graduated from the occasional grinding complaint it had been making for the past month to something new and more urgent, a rhythmic knocking from somewhere deep in the engine that her father had. He'd been alive, would have diagnosed in 30 seconds, and had her drive it straight to his friend Hector's garage. Hector had moved to Phoenix 2 years ago. She didn't have 30 seconds. She had a $12.40 everything else fund. She sat in the parking lot after her shift and listened to the knocking and tried to calculate whether she could make it 40 minutes home without something catastrophic happening. She decided she could. She was wrong in her assessment, but right in her outcome. The truck made it, barely depositing her in her driveway with the engine shaking and the knocking now loud enough to hear through the closed windows. She sat in the truck for a moment after she turned it off. "Don't you quit on me," she said to the dashboard. She said it the same way she said most of the important things in her life, quietly without witnesses, not asking for much, just asking for enough. She went inside. She made toast for dinner because she'd forgotten to buy groceries, and the bread was the last thing in the kitchen that didn't require cooking. She stood at the counter and ate it and looked at the kitchen faucet. The drip. Turn the handle left. She did. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She had learned that unknown numbers were rarely good news, but something made her pick up. "Is this Ashley Carter?" A woman's voice. Professional crisp. "Yes," Ashley said carefully. "My name is Sandra Voss. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Desert Tribune. I've been hearing a story about something that happened at Mesa Road Diner yesterday, and I was hoping you'd be willing to—" Ashley hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand for a moment, then she set it on the counter beside the toaster. She finished her toast. It rang again. Same number. She let it go to voicemail. Then a text came in from a number she didn't recognize. Then another. Then her actual phone rang, a different unknown number. She turned it face down on the counter and stood very still. Something was happening. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know how far Duke's 7 words had traveled in the 18 hours since he'd sent them. She didn't know that a post in a Hells Angels memorial group had been shared 417 times. She didn't know that 3 different people had already tried to call Mesa Road Diner asking about the waitress who paid the biker's bill, and that Gary Pruitt had told all 3 of them with increasing irritability that it was a private personnel matter. She didn't know any of that. She turned her phone over, blocked both unknown numbers, and went to bed. The next morning, she discovered that someone had written about her on a Facebook group called Southwest Writers Memorial. Ronnie Delgado, R.I.P. The post was simple. It repeated Duke's 7 words and added, "This woman treated our brothers like human beings when they were at their lowest. Her name is Ashley Carter, and she works at Mesa Road Diner in Red Mesa, Arizona. And she lost money from her own paycheck for doing it. If that doesn't mean something to you, I don't know what will." The post had 1,200 shares. She saw it because Brenda texted her a screenshot at 6:47 in the morning with the message, "Did you know about this?" Ashley stared at the screenshot for a long time. No, she had not known about this. She called Brenda back. "How many people have seen it?" she asked. "Honey, it's got 1,200 shares and it's been up for 6 hours. Probably a lot." "Okay," Ashley said. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. She was at the diner by 7. Gary Pruitt was not yet there, which was unusual. Ramon was at the grill. He nodded at her. She nodded back. They were not people who needed a lot of words. The morning started normally. Tables orders coffee, the ordinary rhythm of it. But by 8:30, she noticed that the phone on the counter had rung 4 times in 30 minutes. Normally, it rang maybe twice a morning. Gary, who arrived at 8, took each call in his office and came back looking progressively more compressed, like a man having something squeezed out of him. At 9:15, he called her into the office. She sat in the same chair she'd sat in 24 hours earlier. "I've had calls from 2 journalists this morning," he said, "and I've had calls from—" He looked at a notepad, 7 individuals who identified themselves as members of motorcycle clubs asking about you specifically. "What did you tell them?" "I told them you were unavailable. I told them it was a personnel matter." He set the notepad down. "Ashley, I need to know if you had anything to do with this." "With what?" "With this story getting out, this internet situation." She met his eyes. "I didn't tell anyone anything. I went home. I had toast." He studied her. "I believe you," he said finally, and she could tell he meant it, which surprised her. "But this is becoming a problem. If journalists start showing up here, if this turns into some kind of media thing—" "Gary." She leaned forward slightly. 6 men came in here after burying their friend. They couldn't pay. I made a decision. That's the whole story. I don't know why anyone else is making it bigger than that. Because 1,200 people shared it, he said. She had no answer for that. She went back to work. By noon, the post had 4,000 shares. By 2 o'clock, someone had created a separate post specifically about the fact that Ashley had received a formal written warning for her act of kindness, and that post was spreading faster than the first one. By 3 o'clock, her manager's name was in the comments of both posts. Gary Pruitt, Mesa Road Diner, Red Mesa, Arizona. People were leaving one-star reviews on the diner's Google page. People were calling the diner's phone number and hanging up without speaking. One woman had posted a comment that simply read, "I drove through Red Mesa 6 years ago and stopped at that diner, and I always thought there was something off about how the staff looked. Now I understand why." Ashley didn't see any of this in real time. She was working. She was always working. What she saw was this: at 3:45, while she was clearing table 6, Gary Pruitt walked out of his office and stood in the middle of the diner with his phone in his hand and his face the color of old ash and said, "Everyone, I need everyone to listen." Brenda stopped moving. Ramon appeared at the kitchen window. The 2 customers at the counter looked up. There may be some people coming by the diner," Gary said. His voice had lost its usual edge. "Media people possibly. I need everyone to understand that you are not to speak to journalists. You are not to comment on any of the recent social media activity." "Gary." Ashley's voice was calm. "What's happening?" He looked at her, and in that look she saw something she had never seen on Gary Pruitt's face before. Fear. Not annoyance, not calculation. Actual fear. "Duke Harrison," Gary said slowly, "just posted on a statewide motorcycle group that they're planning some kind of gathering. This weekend, here." He held up his phone. She couldn't read the screen from across the room. "He's got over 3,000 responses." The diner went completely silent. Ashley set down the plates she was holding. "How many?" she said. Gary looked at his phone again. His voice was flat when he said it. "He's asking who wants to come show their respects to the woman who treated their brothers right." He paused. "Ashley, there are 400 people who've already said yes." Brenda made a sound. Ramon said something in Spanish that Ashley didn't catch. Ashley stood very still in the middle of the diner floor and thought about the morning she'd torn an $89 receipt in half. She thought about the 30 seconds she'd given herself in the hallway by the restrooms to feel the weight of it and then put it down and gone back to work. She had thought the story was done. "It's just people," she said finally. "Ashley." "It's just people," she said again more firmly. "That's all. Let me get back to my tables." She picked up the plates. She walked back to the kitchen. And out on the highway, heading south through the Arizona desert on a road that led directly to Red Mesa, the first riders were already moving. She told herself it would be a few dozen. That was the number Ashley Carter settled on during the drive home Friday night, the truck knocking its rhythmic protest under the hood while the radio played a country song she didn't know the words to. A few dozen riders, maybe 50, paying some kind of tribute, the way people do when something on the internet catches their attention for a weekend before the algorithm moves on to the next thing. She had seen that cycle before. She understood how quickly the world's attention moved. She told herself 50 riders a couple of hours, and then life goes back to what it was. She was wrong by 435 people. Saturday morning, she woke at 4:45 without the alarm. Something in her chest had been tight since Thursday, a low-grade tension that wasn't quite dread and wasn't quite excitement, but lived in the uncomfortable territory between both. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in the dark and drank it and listened to the silence of Red Mesa before sunrise, that particular desert silence that has weight and texture to it, like something holding its breath. She got dressed. She got in the truck. She turned the key and waited for the knocking to start, and it did, faithful as ever, and she said, "Okay, let's go." The way she'd been talking to the truck for 2 years, the way you talk to something you depend on and can't afford to replace. She pulled out of the driveway. She saw the first motorcycle before she reached the end of her street. It was parked on the shoulder of the road, not moving, its rider sitting still with a coffee thermos in one hand and a phone in the other. He looked up when her headlights swept past him. He didn't wave. She didn't wave. She kept driving. She saw 3 more before she reached the highway. By the time she turned onto the main road toward the diner, there were motorcycles parked along both shoulders as far as she could see in the pre-dawn dark, a long double line of them stretching ahead like a corridor, their chrome catching the first gray light beginning to break on the eastern horizon. She slowed the truck involuntarily. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Oh, she said quietly to nobody. She drove slowly between the lines of parked bikes. Riders were standing beside them, sitting on them, leaning against them. Some were drinking coffee from thermoses. Some were looking at their phones. Some simply stood with their arms crossed against the early morning chill, watching her truck pass with an attention that wasn't threatening. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't categorize in the moment because she had never been on the receiving end of it before. It was respect. Quiet, deliberate physical respect from people who had driven through the night to stand in the desert dark of Red Mesa, Arizona to show it. She pulled into the diner parking lot and sat in the truck for a full 30 seconds before she could make herself get out. The lot was already half filled with motorcycles. More were coming down the highway. She could hear them now. Not the roar she'd expected, but something more measured, a deep, steady rumble that built gradually the way thunder builds when a storm is still far away but moving closer. She got out of the truck. The morning air hit her, warm already even at this hour. She stood in the parking lot with her apron in her hands and looked at what was assembling around her. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she had absolutely no idea what to do next. Ashley Carter. She turned. A woman about her age, compact and direct-looking, with a Hells Angels support patch on her jacket, and the expression of someone who organized things for a living, was walking toward her. "I'm Diane," the woman said. She extended her hand. "I'm Duke's wife. He sent me ahead last night. He said you'd probably show up before everyone else and look like you needed someone to tell you it was real." Ashley shook her hand. "Is it?" she said. Diane smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes. "Honey, there's a group from New Mexico that left at 2 in the morning to be here." "Yeah, it's real." Ashley looked at the highway. More headlights, more engines. The rumble was getting louder. "How many?" she asked. Diane glanced at her phone. Last count from the group chat was 460, but people kept saying they were coming in last night, so... She shrugged. "More." Ashley sat down on the front bumper of her truck. Not because she planned to, her legs simply decided they were done standing for a moment. Diane sat down beside her with the easy comfort of someone who understood when a person needed company without conversation. They sat together for a moment while the highway filled. "He didn't have to do this," Ashley said finally. "No," Diane agreed. "He didn't. It was $89. Diane looked at her. "You know what Duke told me when he called Thursday night?" She didn't wait for Ashley to answer. "He said the last time a stranger treated him like a human being, without wanting something in return, he was 26 years old. He's 54 now." She let that sit for a moment. 28 years is a long time to go without someone just being decent to you for no reason. Ashley pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in the parking lot. She had made that decision somewhere on the drive over, and she intended to hold to it. "I was just doing my job," she said. "No," Diane said gently and firmly. "You weren't. Your job was to take their money. You did something else." The sun was fully up now, and with it came the full scale of what was happening on the highway outside Mesa Road Diner in Red Mesa, Arizona. Ashley stood up from the bumper and looked, and the number hit her the way cold water hits you all at once, unavoidable, taking the breath. She stopped counting at 300. They kept coming. She heard Gary Pruitt's car before she saw it, the particular sound of his sedan hitting the gravel lot too fast, braking too hard. He got out and stood beside his car door and looked at the highway and looked at the parking lot and looked at the riders already standing 2 and 3 deep outside the diner windows, and his face went through approximately 7 different expressions in the space of 4 seconds. He found Ashley in the crowd. "What," he said, walking toward her, "is this?" "People," she said. "Ashley, I told you Thursday. It's just people, Gary." She turned to face him fully. "They want to eat breakfast and pay their bill and go home. Let me open the diner. We can't serve 400. We can serve as many as we can serve," she said, "one at a time, like we always do." He stared at her. Then he looked back at the highway. Another group of riders was coming in, maybe 30, pulling off in a practice formation. 2 local police cruisers had materialized at the edge of the lot, officers standing beside them, with the careful posture of people who were watching very closely and hoping very hard they wouldn't need to do anything. One of the officers, a younger man she recognized as Deputy Cal Reeves, she'd served him coffee every Thursday morning for 2 years, caught her eye, and lifted his chin in a question. She gave him a small nod. "Everything's fine," he nodded back. She noticed he visibly relaxed. She unlocked the diner. What happened in the next 3 hours she would later describe to people simply as the morning, because there was no single word in her vocabulary that covered it. She opened the doors and the first wave came in orderly, patient, the same careful not to take up too much space energy she'd seen from Duke's table 3 days ago, replicated now across dozens of faces. They sat where there was room. They waited without complaint. They said please and thank you with a consistency that she noticed and that Ramon noticed and that even Gary, moving through the room with the stiff gait of a man who had completely lost control of his Saturday, appeared to notice. Brenda had come in without being called. She'd just shown up 40 minutes before her shift, tied her apron on, and gotten to work without a word of explanation, because there was no explanation needed. Ramon cooked without stopping. The service bell rang every 40 seconds. Ashley moved. She moved like she had been built for this, and maybe she had 38 years of learning how to hold herself together under pressure, how to smile when her feet hurt and her back ached and the numbers in her head didn't add up, how to make people feel like they were at somebody's table instead of just a commercial transaction. She refilled coffee, she took orders, she made change. And then at 9:47 in the morning, the diner door opened and Duke Harrison walked in. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, one table at a time, as people registered who had entered. Duke moved through the crowd with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew his place in a room without needing to announce it. He had the original receipt in his hand. Ashley watched him from across the diner, the torn halves taped back together, the crease of the tape visible even from a distance. He set it on the counter in front of her. She looked down at it. The two torn halves of an $89 receipt put back together. "We talked about it," Duke said. "All of us, the brothers." He reached under his jacket and produced a metal lockbox. He set it beside the receipt. Every writer outside contributed. Some of the chapters took up collections before they left. "There's cash in here, and there are notes," he paused. "A lot of notes." Ashley put her hand on the lockbox. It was heavier than she expected. "Duke," she started. "Don't," he said, not unkindly. "Don't tell me you can't accept it. You accepted an $89 loss for people you didn't know. You can accept this." She swallowed. "How much?" she asked quietly. He told her. She sat down on the counter stool. She had been trying not to sit down all morning, and now she sat down without intending to because the number he'd said required a moment to get used to. "That's," she started. "From 7 states, Duke said. 14 chapters." She pressed her hand flat on the counter. She breathed. "I don't know what to say to you." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "It's not a transaction. That's the whole point." And then before she could respond, before she could find any of the words she was looking for, Marcus Wings, with the neck tattoo, the youngest one, the one who'd been staring at the floor in the booth 3 days ago, pushed through the crowd and came to stand beside Duke. He was holding a manila envelope. His face was different from the other day. The grief was still there. Grief doesn't leave in 3 days, but underneath it now was something else, something sharp and purposeful. "There's something else," Marcus said. He looked at Duke first, then at Ashley. "While we were getting everything organized, putting the word out about today, some of the guys started digging." "Digging," Ashley said. "Into the diner," Marcus said. "Into payroll records, into how this place operates." He held up the envelope. "Duke, you want to tell her, or should I?" Duke looked at the envelope, then at Ashley. Something in his expression had shifted, the quiet grief of Thursday replaced now by something harder and more deliberate. "Your manager," Duke said carefully. "Gary Pruitt. We started hearing things from people who used to work here, former employees who saw the Facebook post and started reaching out to writers who reached out to us." Ashley went still. "What kind of things?" she said. "The kind that have to do with paychecks," Duke said, "and deductions, and numbers that don't match what people were promised when they were hired." The diner had gotten very quiet again. Not the whole room, most of it was still the warm noise of 400 people eating breakfast and talking among themselves. But the immediate circle around the counter had gone silent, and in that silence, Ashley heard her own heartbeat surprisingly clearly. "How many people?" she said. Marcus opened the envelope. 6 former employees contacted us directly. 3 of them kept their pay stubs. He set 3 pieces of paper on the counter beside the taped receipt. "The deductions don't match any policy that's legal under Arizona labor law. We had someone look at them." "Who?" Ashley said. "Guy named Warren. He's a paralegal, also rides a Softail." Marcus almost smiled. He looked at these for about 4 minutes and said, and I quote, "This is wage theft. Plain language." Ashley stared at the pay stubs. She thought about her own paychecks, about the numbers that had never quite added up the way she calculated them, the small discrepancies she had always attributed to her own math or to some policy she didn't understand. She had never looked closely enough. She had been too tired and too busy trying to keep the mortgage paid to look closely enough. "How long?" she said. "Warren thinks at least 3 years," Marcus said. "Probably longer." 3 years. She picked up one of the pay stubs. She looked at the deduction column, and then she saw it clear once you knew to look for it. A line item labeled facility maintenance contribution that was not in any employee agreement she had ever signed. $40 every pay period for 3 years. "Gary," her voice came out even, controlled. She was aware distantly that approximately 400 people were in the vicinity of this conversation, and that her voice was steady, and she was grateful for that, because inside she was something that was not steady at all. Gary Pruitt had been standing 12 feet away. She hadn't looked at him in the last 10 minutes, and she looked at him now. He was holding a coffee mug with both hands, and he was very still. "I'd like an explanation," Ashley said. "For this line item," she held up the pay stub. "Right now, in front of everyone." "That's," Gary started. He stopped. He looked at Duke. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the 400 people in and around his diner. "That's a standard operational charge that's fully disclosed." "Where?" Ashley said. "Show me where it's disclosed." Silence. "Show me the paperwork, Gary. Show me where I signed something agreeing to a $40 facility maintenance contribution every 2 weeks for 3 years. More silence. Deputy Cal Reeves had moved closer. He wasn't intervening. He was listening. His hand was not on anything. He was simply present in the way that law enforcement becomes present when a situation is developing and the right move is attention rather than action. Gary Pruitt set his coffee mug down on the nearest table. "I think," he said quietly, "that I need to make a call." "I think," Duke Harrison said from the other side of the counter, with the same quiet and absolute certainty that Ashley had used 3 days ago when she tore a receipt in half, "that it's a little late for that." Gary looked around the room one more time, at the writers, at the pay stubs on the counter, at Deputy Reeves standing near the door, at Ashley Carter, who had worked for him for 4 years without complaint, who had signed his disciplinary form 2 days ago with the same dignity she apparently did everything, and who was now looking at him with eyes that had moved past hurt directly into something much steadier and much more dangerous to him. Understanding. He walked back into his office. The door didn't slam. It closed quietly, which was somehow worse. Brenda appeared at Ashley's elbow. Her voice was low. "You okay?" "I don't know yet," Ashley said. For the second time in 3 days, she was saying those words and meaning them completely. She set the pay stub down on the counter beside the taped receipt. She looked at the lockbox Duke had brought in. She looked at the 400 people eating breakfast in and around the diner she had spent 4 years of her life serving. She thought about her father. About 31 years in one house. About fixing the porch steps 3 times and never getting to the kitchen faucet. She thought about what it meant to stay somewhere, to keep showing up, to decide that a place and the people in it were worth the cost. Outside, more engines. A news van had arrived. She could see it through the front window. The logo of a Tucson station on the side, a reporter standing in the parking lot gesturing toward the highway with a microphone. Deputy Reeves had stepped outside to manage whatever was happening there. Duke was still at the counter. "What happens now?" Ashley asked him. He considered the question. "Now Warren files a complaint with the Arizona Labor Department. The former employees have documentation. You probably do too if you pull your own records." He paused. "It's going to get complicated before it gets simple." "It's already complicated," she said. "Yeah," he almost smiled. "But now you've got people in your corner." She looked at him. At the man who 3 days ago had sat in her corner booth with $12 in an $89 problem and had looked her in the eye and told her the truth. "Why," she said, "why'd you do all this? Not just today, all of it." Duke was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the counter, at the taped receipt. "Because Ronnie would have," he said. "Our brother who died. Ronnie always said the way you find out what a person's made of is watch how they treat somebody who can't do anything for them." He looked up. "You couldn't do anything for us. You did it anyway." Ashley put her hand on the taped receipt. She held it there. Outside, the rumble of 485 motorcycles settled into the morning, like a second heartbeat steady and present in Red Mesa, Arizona, which had never once expected to be the center of anything, held very still and paid attention. Gary Pruitt stayed in his office for 11 minutes. Ashley knew because she counted. Not deliberately, she was still moving, still working, still pouring coffee and running orders because 485 people had shown up, and they were human beings who needed to eat, and she was not going to stop doing her job because the man in the back office was having a private crisis of his own making. But some part of her brain that operated independently of the rest kept a quiet tally. 11 minutes. Then the office door opened and Gary came back out. He looked smaller somehow, not physically. Something in the way he was carrying himself had changed, like a structure that has had one load-bearing wall removed and is still standing, but everyone in the room can tell the difference. He walked to the counter. He stood on the opposite side from Duke. He looked at Ashley. "I've called my lawyer," he said. "Okay," Ashley said. "He's advised me not to discuss the payroll matters until we've had a chance to review." "Gary." She set down the coffee pot. She looked at him directly. "I've worked here for 4 years. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that $40 deduction was legal." He held her gaze for approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked at the counter. That was her answer. "You should know," Duke said from the other side, his voice carrying just far enough, "that Warren filed the complaint with the Arizona Labor Department 40 minutes ago. Digitally, it's already in the system." Gary's head came up. "It's Saturday," he said almost reflexively. "Complaints don't care about weekends," Marcus said from 3 feet away. "The timestamp does, though, and it's in." Something moved across Gary Pruitt's face that Ashley had never seen there before. Not anger, which she had seen plenty of. Not calculation, which was his default. This was something raw. The expression of a man who has been running a particular system for a long time and has just watched the system stop. He turned and walked back to his office. The door closed again. Brenda materialized at Ashley's shoulder with the timing she had always had, appearing exactly when needed and disappearing just as cleanly. "6 more people called the diner this morning," she said quietly. "Before I came in, I checked the voicemail. 3 of them said they used to work here. 1 of them left a number." Ashley looked at her. "How long have you worked here, Brenda?" Brenda was quiet for a beat too long. 7 years, she said. "Have you ever looked at your pay stubs, really looked?" Another beat. Brenda set down the coffee carafe she was holding. She took off her reading glasses from where they were pushed up on her head and put them on. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. She opened her banking app. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she said very quietly a word that Ashley had never heard her use in 7 years of working together. Ashley put her hand on Brenda's arm. "Pull your stubs," she said. "All of them. Keep them safe." Brenda nodded. She was already moving toward her bag under the counter. Ramon appeared at the kitchen window. He had been listening. He was always listening, which most people forgot because he rarely spoke. He held up his phone through the window. On the screen was his own banking app. He pointed to a line item. Ashley looked at it. Facility maintenance contribution. $40, dating back from what she could see at least 5 years. "Ramon," she said, "how long have you been here?" 8 years, he said. His voice was flat and precise. $480 a year. $40 times 12 months. 8 years. He paused. $3,840. The number fell into the room like something heavy dropped from a height. Duke heard it. He didn't say anything. He just wrote it down on a napkin and slid it toward Marcus, who photographed it with his phone. The morning kept moving because mornings do regardless of what is being uncovered inside them. Ashley kept working because that was the thing she knew how to do. She carried plates. She poured coffee. She made change from the register and said thank you and meant it, and smiled at the riders who came through the door with the same careful space-conscious consideration their brothers had shown on Tuesday, this quality that she kept noticing and that kept moving her in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. These were people the world had decided to see as dangerous, and they were folding their napkins and saying please and tipping 25% on a $4 cup of coffee. At 11:15, the Tucson news crew came inside. The reporter was a woman in her 30s named Jenna Park, professional and alert, with the particular energy of someone who understands they are standing in the middle of a story and is trying very hard not to do anything to make it disappear. She approached Ashley at the counter with her microphone at her side, not raised-fist, and introduced herself with a directness Ashley respected. "I'm not here to make trouble," Jenna said. "I just want to tell this right." Ashley studied her for a moment. "What do you already know?" "I know about Tuesday, the bill, the receipt. I know about the written warning." She paused. "I'm starting to hear things about payroll. I don't have enough yet to report it, but I will." "Then wait until you do," Ashley said. "Report what you can prove." Jenna looked at her for a moment. "Can I ask you one question on camera, just one?" Ashley looked at Duke. He gave her nothing deliberately, she thought. This was her call, and he was making sure she knew it. "One question," Ashley said. The camera came up. The mic came up. Jenna waited until the operator nodded. "Ashley, when you tore up that receipt on Tuesday, did you have any idea it would lead to this?" Ashley looked at the camera. She thought about the 30 seconds in the hallway by the restrooms. She thought about her father's couch. She thought about $89 and a man named Duke who had told her the truth when he didn't have to. "I thought it would lead to me losing $89, she said. "That's all I thought. I did it because it was the right thing to do and I didn't need it to lead anywhere." She stepped back from the mic. "That's your one." Jenna nodded. She lowered the microphone. "For what it's worth," she said off camera, "I think what's happening with the payroll is going to be the bigger story." "Maybe," Ashley said, "but it's not my story to tell. It belongs to the people it happened to." By noon, 4 former employees of Mesa Road Diner had shown up in person. Ashley hadn't expected that. She'd expected phone calls, maybe emails, through some channel she didn't know about. She hadn't expected to look up from the counter and see a woman she vaguely recognized from years ago, a waitress named Teresa, who had worked there briefly before Ashley started, who had left abruptly under circumstances nobody had ever fully explained, standing inside the door with a manila folder held against her chest. Behind Teresa was a young man Ashley didn't recognize at all. Behind him were 2 women who had worked there within the last 3 years, both of whom Ashley remembered clearly, one named Priya, who had left after 6 months saying she'd found something closer to home, and one named Kim, who had simply stopped showing up one day without explanation. They looked at each other across the crowded diner with the particular recognition of people who have shared an experience they never discussed. "I kept everything," Teresa said. She held up the folder. "I kept it because something felt wrong and I didn't know what to do with it, and I kept it." Ashley came around the counter. She guided them to the only open booth, left a small 2-top near the window that she pushed a second chair against to make room. She got them coffee without asking. She sat with them for 7 minutes, 7 minutes she didn't technically have. 7 minutes that meant 4 tables went without refills and 2 orders came out slow, and she listened. Teresa's story was the one that hit hardest. She had worked at Mesa Road Diner 4 years before Ashley started. She had noticed the deduction on her 3rd paycheck and had gone to Gary Pruitt directly professionally with her pay stub in hand and a simple question. "He told me it was standard," Teresa said. "He said every employee signed an agreement during onboarding that included operational cost participation." He showed me a form. She opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the form, a dense half-page of small text with a signature line at the bottom. He said my signature was on it. "Was it?" Ashley asked. "I don't know," Teresa said. "I still don't know. I signed about 11 things during onboarding. They all came in a stack. He could have put anything in that stack." She paused. "I was 23. I needed the job. I signed." Ashley looked at the form, at the small text, at the signature line. She thought about her own onboarding 4 years ago, the stack of papers Gary had put in front of her while she sat in that same small office. The way he'd flipped through them, quickly pointing at the signature lines, explaining each one in a sentence or less. She had been 24, and she had needed the mom, and she had signed. She set the form down. "Warren," she said to no one in particular, but loudly enough that Marcus, who had stayed at the counter all morning, heard her. "I'll call him right now," Marcus said, and had his phone out before she finished the sentence. Warren, the paralegal, arrived 40 minutes later on a Softail that he parked precisely between 2 other bikes with the care of a man who respected order. He was in his 40s, compact and serious, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and a canvas bag that contained apparently everything he needed to begin dismantling a 3-year pattern of wage theft at a roadside diner in Red Mesa, Arizona. He spread his materials across the back booth and worked with the quiet concentration of someone in their element. Ashley brought him coffee twice. He thanked her both times without looking up. At 1:30 in the afternoon, he sat back and took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. How bad? Marcus asked. Warren picked up his notepad. Based on what I have in front of me, 6 former employees plus Ashley, Brenda, and Ramon, the unauthorized deductions go back approximately 8 years. Possibly longer. I'd need more records. He paused. The aggregate conservatively across the employees I can document is somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. The booth went silent. Ashley heard the number and felt it move through her the way significant numbers do not immediately comprehensible as an amount, but immediately comprehensible as a weight. $40,000 to $60,000 extracted one $40 payment at a time from people who were already working for wages that left them counting $89 receipts like they were calculating orbital trajectories. What are the former employees entitled to? Duke asked. He had come to stand at the edge of the booth and was listening with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Back pay penalties, potentially attorney's fees, Warren said. Arizona has fairly strong wage theft statutes. If the Labor Department moves on this and it goes to civil action, these employees have a legitimate case for treble damages. Treble, Brenda said. She had come over from the counter still in her apron. 3 times the amount stolen, Warren said. Brenda sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I want to be clear, Warren continued looking around at the faces. I'm a paralegal. This is not legal advice. They need an attorney, but based on what I'm seeing, he tapped his notepad, they have a very strong foundation. I know 2 labor attorneys, Duke said. Both have done pro bono work for club members. I'll make the calls. Ashley looked at him. Duke, you've done enough. I'll make the calls, he said again, with the same simple certainty he brought to everything. She stopped arguing. 2 things happened simultaneously at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that changed the shape of the day entirely. The first was that Gary Pruitt came out of his office for the 3rd time. He was wearing his jacket now, which meant he was leaving. He walked to the counter and he set down his keys, the diner keys, the spare set he kept on a separate ring, and he looked at Ashley. I've spoken with my attorney at length, he said. His voice was controlled in the way voices get when a person is reciting something they've rehearsed. I'm going to take some personal time effective immediately. The diner will continue normal operations. He paused. You're the senior floor employee. I'd ask you to manage things in my absence. Ashley stared at the keys. Gary, she said. This isn't an admission of anything, he said quickly. My attorney made that clear. I just think it's better for everyone if Gary. She said his name the same way she said everything important, simply directly without decoration. Have you ever once thought about what you were doing to people? The rehearsed control slipped. Just for a moment, a crack in the surface quick and then recovered. But she saw it. She had been watching people's faces across countertops for 15 years and she saw it. He didn't answer. He walked out. The door swung shut. Ashley picked up the keys. She held them in her hand for a moment. They were heavier than she expected, or maybe that was just the weight of what they meant. She set them behind the counter under the register where they'd be safe. The second thing that happened at 2 o'clock was that Jenna Park came back inside with their camera operator and told Ashley that the story had gone regional. The Tucson affiliate had picked it up. The Phoenix station was calling. A national morning program had made an inquiry. It's not just the kindness story anymore, Jenna said. She kept her voice professional, but Ashley could hear the urgency underneath it. The payroll story is breaking. Someone leaked the Labor Department complaint to a journalist in Phoenix. It's going to be everywhere by tonight. Ashley leaned against the counter. She thought about Tuesday, about a quiet afternoon and 6 men in a corner booth and an $89 receipt. Do you need me on camera again, she asked. Only if you want to, Mr. Jenna said. What I want, Ashley said carefully, is for the people who are actually owed money to be the ones who tell their story. Teresa and Kim and Priya and the others, they're the ones who should be on camera, not me. Jenna paused. You understand that you're the reason anyone's listening, right? You're the center of this. I was never trying to be the center of anything, Ashley said. I tore up a check. Everything else happened around me. She pushed off the counter and went back to work. Because there were still tables that needed covering. Because Brenda was handling 6 things at once, and Ramon had been at the grill for 8 hours, and the lunch crowd was shifting into the late afternoon lull, and there were still riders outside who hadn't eaten yet, patient and steady in the Arizona heat, waiting their turn, like they had all the time in the world. She moved between tables. She poured coffee. She made change. At 3:15, Diane found her in the back hallway near the restrooms, the same hallway where 4 days ago Ashley had pressed her back against the wall and given herself 30 seconds to feel the weight of $89 before going back out. Diane was holding an envelope. "From the writers," she said. "The Community Assistance Fund. Duke wanted me to give it to you directly." She paused. "It covers your mortgage balance, the overdue amount, and 2 months forward." Ashley didn't take the envelope immediately. She looked at it in Diane's hand. "The truck too," Diane added. "There's a contact for a mechanic in Tucson. Duke knows him. He'll come to Red Mesa and do the repair at cost for parts only." Ashley pressed her lips together. "I haven't done anything to deserve this," she said. "That's exactly why you deserve it," Diane said. "The people who do things trying to earn rewards never get what they're after. You weren't trying to earn anything." Ashley took the envelope. She held it the way she'd held the lockbox that morning, with both hands feeling the weight of it. Not the weight of the money exactly, the weight of what it represented. 14 chapters, 7 states, 485 riders who had driven through the night and the morning to a desert town they had never heard of to stand beside a woman they didn't know, because something in them recognized something in her and decided it was worth the distance. She thought about her father. She thought about 28 years Duke had said it the last time a stranger treated him like a human being 28 years ago. She thought about what it cost a person to go 28 years without ordinary decency and still become someone who drove 9 hours to return it when they found it. She thought about Teresa, 23 years old, with a stack of papers in front of her and a job she needed, signing things she didn't fully read, because that's what you do when the choice is between dignity and rent. She thought about Ramon, 8 years at a grill, $3,840 taken from him in $40 increments, quiet and steady, and competent, never complaining, because complaining had never been on the menu of options available to him. She thought about all of it at once, and it was too much and not enough, simultaneously, the way the important things always are. "Diane," she said. "Yeah." "Tell Duke," she started, and then stopped because there wasn't a sentence in her that was large enough. "Just tell him thank you for seeing us." Diane nodded. Her eyes were bright, but she was like Ashley, a woman who had decided not to cry in places where other people could see it. "He knows," Diane said. "He knew the minute you tore up that receipt." Ashley put the envelope in her apron pocket. She straightened up. She smoothed the front of her apron with both hands, the gesture she'd made 10,000 times, the reset gesture, the here we go gesture. She walked back out to the floor. The riders were beginning to leave by late afternoon in the same measured, organized way they had arrived. Not all at once, gradually in groups the way a tide goes out. Each group that passed through the door on the way out stopped at the counter. Some of them shook her hand. Some of them simply nodded. One older man with white hair and a long beard stopped in front of her and held out his hand, and when she took it, he covered it with his other hand and held it for a moment and didn't say a word, and she understood completely what he meant. The last group through the door just before 4 o'clock was the 6. Duke's original 6, Duke, Marcus, and the 4 others who had sat in the corner booth on Tuesday with $12 and a grief too large for the room. They came to the counter and stood in a line, all 6 of them, and the diner had quieted enough by then that when Duke spoke, the whole room could hear him. "We're going to head out," he said. "Safe ride," Ashley said. "We'll be back," Marcus said. Not a promise made lightly. The way he said it made clear it was not. "Brother's table will be ready," she said, and then she stopped. The words had come out before she fully knew she was going to say them. She looked at Duke. "I think that's what I'd call it, if it were mine. Brother's table." Duke looked at her for a long moment. "Ronnie would have liked that," he said. They walked out. She heard the 6 engines turn over. She heard them pull out of the lot. She heard them hit the highway and accelerate, the sound rising and then diminishing, moving south through the desert in the direction of everything that came next. She stood at the counter and listened until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she reached under the register and picked up Gary Pruitt's keys. She turned them over in her hand. Beside her, Brenda said softly, "What are you thinking?" Ashley looked at the diner, at Ramon through the kitchen window still at his grill, at the handful of regular customers who had stayed through the entire extraordinary day and were now sitting quietly in the changed atmosphere of a room that knew it had witnessed something, at the memorial napkin Duke had written on still sitting on the counter, at the taped receipt beside the register. "I'm thinking," Ashley said slowly, "about what it would take to buy this place." Brenda went very still. Ashley, I'm not saying now, Ashley said. I'm not saying tomorrow. She closed her fingers around Gary's keys. I'm just thinking about it. She set the keys in her apron pocket next to the envelope from Diane. She picked up the coffee pot. She went back to work. The thought didn't leave her. That was the thing about certain ideas, the real ones, the ones that come from somewhere deeper than strategy or ambition. They don't arrive with fanfare and they don't leave when you tell them to. They simply settle in and wait patient as desert heat until you stop pretending you're not thinking about them. Ashley went home that Saturday night with Gary Pruitt's keys still in her apron pocket. She found them when she emptied it at the kitchen counter. She set them beside the envelope from Diane, beside her phone, beside the granola bar wrapper she'd been meaning to throw away for 3 days. She stood there looking at all of it, the keys, the envelope, the ordinary debris of an extraordinary day, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, steadier than that, more structural. The feeling of a foundation being poured somewhere underneath the ground. She was standing on something solid, taking shape below the surface before anyone could see it from above. She opened the envelope from Diane. She had been waiting to open it the way she sometimes waited to read important things, until she was alone and the house was quiet and she could give them the full weight of her attention. She spread the contents on the counter. She read the numbers carefully twice. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, not because there wasn't a chair nearby, but because the floor felt right, felt grounded, felt like the appropriate place to sit when your life makes a sudden sharp turn towards something you hadn't let yourself imagine. The mortgage, welcome. Das Dreamerish, covered 2 months forward. She did the math in her head the way she always did, involuntary and immediate. She now had a window, not a large one, but a real one, of time in which the ground beneath her father's house was solid. She looked at the kitchen faucet. The drip was there. Turn the handle left. She had been turning it left for 14 months. Dad, she said quietly to the empty kitchen, I might be okay. She sat on the floor for another 10 minutes. Then she got up because the floor was hard and she had an early morning, and she was above all things a practical woman. She did not sleep well, but she slept better than she had in weeks. That counted. Sunday she went to the diner out of habit before she remembered there was no formal schedule to keep, no Gary to report to, no official management structure currently operating. She went anyway because the diner was open 7 days and the Sunday regulars expected their coffee and their eggs, and she was not the kind of person who let regulars down. Ramon was already at the grill. Of course he was. You know, we don't technically have a manager right now, Ashley said. I know, Ramon said. He flipped 2 eggs with the particular wrist motion he'd been doing for 8 years. You're here, aren't you? She put her apron on. Brenda came in at 8. She sat at the counter before her shift started, which she never did, and she had a piece of paper in her hand. I pulled all my stubs, she said. 7 years. I added it up. She set the paper on the counter. $23,520. Ashley looked at the number. We did push in my diary. The number. She didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would be adequate. Warren called me last night, Brenda continued. He said Duke connected him with one of those labor attorneys. Pro bono. She wants to meet with all of us this week, which Ramon, Teresa, Kim, Priya, the others. She paused. Warren thinks if the labor department moves fast, we could see a judgment within 6 months. Are you going? Ashley asked. Brenda looked at her like the question was almost offensive. I worked here 7 years. He took $23,000 from me, $40 at a time, and told me it was standard policy. She folded the paper precisely. Yes, I'm going. Ashley nodded. I'll come with you if you want. I was going to ask, Brenda said. The Sunday morning moved the way Sunday mornings do, slower than the weekday rush, more forgiving, the kind of pace that lets a person think between tables. Ashley thought. She carried coffee and she thought. She made change and she thought. She smiled at the retired couple by the window who came every Sunday and ordered the same things every Sunday and had been doing so they had once told her for 11 years, and she thought. She was thinking about the diner, about what it would take, practically, specifically in real numbers. She knew the lease terms because she had overheard enough of Gary's conversations over 4 years to have a rough picture. She knew the equipment, the supplier contracts, the seasonal patterns of the customer base. She knew which tables wobbled and which booths had tears in the vinyl, and which section of the counter caught the afternoon glare, in a way that made customers squint. She knew this place the way you know something you've given years of your life to without ever being asked to take ownership of it. At 10:30, her phone rang. The number was Duke's. She had it in her contacts, now had added it Friday night without thinking much about it. "How are you doing?" Duke asked. "I'm working," she said. "Of course you are." She could hear the mild amusement in his voice. "I'm calling because I spoke with the attorney this morning. Linda Marsh. She's good. She said the Labor Department complaint has already been flagged for priority review because of the media attention." "How much media attention?" Ashley asked carefully. "The Phoenix story ran last night on the 11 o'clock news. The national morning program reached out to Jenna Park." And he paused just briefly. "There's something else." "What?" "The diner owner," Duke said. "Not Gary, the actual owner. The man who owns the property and the business license. Guy named Howard Kessler. He lives in Scottsdale. He apparently had no knowledge of the payroll situation according to his attorney who called Linda this morning." Ashley stopped walking. She was in the middle of the diner floor with a coffee pot and she stopped. "He didn't know," she said. "That's what his attorney says. Whether that's true or a legal position is something Linda will figure out. But here's the thing." Duke paused again, and this time she could feel the weight of what was coming before he said it. "Howard Kessler wants to meet with you." "With me?" "He reached out through Linda's office. He said he's been watching the news coverage. He said he wants to understand what happened in his diner, and he wants to hear it from you directly." Ashley looked at the coffee pot in her hand, at the diner around her, at Ramon, through the kitchen window at Brenda moving between tables at the Sunday morning regulars, who had no idea that the ordinary place they came for eggs and coffee was sitting at the edge of something that hadn't resolved itself yet. "When?" she said. "Tuesday," Duke said. "If you're willing." Tuesday. Exactly 1 week from the afternoon, she had torn an $89 receipt in half. "I'll be there," she said. She went back to pouring coffee. She did not tell Brenda or Ramon immediately because she needed to think about it first, to sit with it, to understand what she was actually walking into before she said it out loud and made it fully real. She knew that Howard Kessler's motivations could be anything: liability management, damage control, the need to put a human face on a conversation he was legally obligated to have. She was not naive. She had not survived 38 years in the last 14 months by being naive. But she also remembered what Diane had said, that the people who do things trying to earn rewards never get what they're after. She wasn't walking into Tuesday looking for anything. She was walking in as herself. Monday arrived with the news that the Arizona Labor Department had formally opened an investigation into Mesa Road Diner's payroll practices. Jenna Park texted Ashley the link to the official statement at 7 in the morning with a single line beneath it: "You did this, whether you meant to or not." Ashley read the text while sitting in her truck in the diner parking lot, engine off, listening to the morning silence. She typed back, "The people who kept their pay stubs did this. I just tore up a check." Jenna sent back a single word: "Remarkable." Inside, she found something she hadn't expected. 3 of the former employees, Teresa, Kim, and Priya, were waiting in the corner booth. Not the booth Duke's group had sat in, a different one. But she noticed the choice of corner, the choice of sitting where you could see the door and not be approached from behind, and she understood it. "We wanted to see you before the attorney meeting this afternoon," Teresa said. She had the same folder from Saturday. She also had a new expression, something resolved and clear that hadn't been there 2 days ago. "How are you all doing?" Ashley asked. She sat across from them without ceremony. "Scared," Kim said. She was the youngest of the 3, early 30s, with the direct honesty of someone who had decided that there was no point anymore in softening things. "I need the back pay. I actually need it. I left here because I found something else, but the truth is the pay here was so bad I couldn't make rent some months, and she stopped. "I just need it to work out." "Warren says it's solid," Ashley said. "The documentation is solid." "Warren's a paralegal," Priya said, not dismissively, precisely. "Linda Marsh is an attorney. Linda Marsh is an attorney who took this pro bono because she thinks it's winnable," Ashley said. "That means she doesn't get paid if you don't. She has every reason to be sure before she commits." The 3 women looked at each other. "We're going," Teresa said finally. "All 6 of us. We already confirmed." "Good," Ashley said. "I'll be there." The attorney meeting was at 2 in the afternoon in a conference room in Tucson, 40 minutes from Red Mesa, and Ashley drove there in the knocking truck, which she had arranged to have looked at Thursday, the Tucson mechanic, Duke knew, having already called to confirm with Brenda in the passenger seat and Ramon in the back, which was the first time in 4 years of working together, that all three of them had been in a vehicle at the same time. Nobody said much on the drive. Ramon looked out the window. Brenda held her folder of pay stubs on her lap with both hands. Ashley kept her eyes on the road and thought about Tuesday. Linda Marsh was in her 50s, with the calm efficiency of a person who had been in rooms like this one many times and knew exactly how much energy each moment required. She shook hands with everyone. She did not waste time. "I've reviewed all the documentation Warren compiled," she said once they were seated. "I've also spoken with the Labor Department investigator assigned to the case. I want to be honest with you about where we stand." She looked around the table. "The case is strong. The deduction is not in any signed agreement that any of you can be shown to have acknowledged in language that meets Arizona's disclosure requirements. That's the foundation." She paused. "The complication is Howard Kessler, the owner," Ashley said. "He's claiming Gary Pruitt implemented this independently without ownership knowledge or authorization. If that holds up, it changes the liability structure. Gary becomes the primary defendant. The question of what Kessler knew and when becomes central." She looked directly at Ashley. "I understand you're meeting with Kessler tomorrow." "Yes." "I'd like you to listen more than you speak," Linda said. "And I'd like you to call me directly afterward." "Understood," Ashley said. On the drive back, Brenda said, "Do you trust him, Kessler?" "I don't know him," Ashley said. "Do you trust your Rita people?" Ashley thought about Duke, about the corner booth on Tuesday, about knowing in the first 30 seconds that those 6 men were carrying something real and heavy and honest. "Usually," she said. Brenda nodded. She looked back out the window. "Then trust it tomorrow." Tuesday morning, 7 days after the receipt, Ashley Carter drove to Scottsdale in the knocking truck, which she had promised herself would be its last long drive in its current condition, and she arrived at an office building and was shown to a conference room by a receptionist who offered her water with the careful courtesy of someone who has been briefed to be careful. Howard Kessler was not what she had constructed in her head. She had expected someone corporate defended, armored with legal preparation. He was 71, heavy-set, with the look of a man who had built something from nothing and had spent so long managing it from a distance that he had lost track of what it had become up close. He stood when she entered. He shook her hand. His grip was firm, but not performed. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking," she said. They sat. His attorney was in the room. Linda had told her he would be. She had also told her that the attorney's presence meant nothing about Kessler's intentions either way. It was simply what people did when the situation had legal dimensions, and the situation had legal dimensions. "I've watched everything," Kessler said. He did not pick up a pen or look at papers. He looked at her. "The news coverage, the social media. I watched the footage from the parking lot Saturday the riders arriving." He paused. "I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer." "All right," she said. "Did you know what was happening with the payroll?" She met his eyes. "I knew my checks didn't always match what I calculated. I thought I was making math errors. I didn't look closely enough." She paused. "I should have. I didn't. That's the truth." He nodded slowly. "I didn't know either," he said. "I want to be clear that my attorney has advised me not to make admissions, and I'm not making legal admissions. But I'm telling you as a person I didn't know. Gary Pruitt ran that location for 9 years with complete operational authority, and I trusted that authority without verifying what I should have verified." He stopped. "That's on me." The room was very quiet. "What do you want from this meeting?" Ashley asked. He looked at her steadily. "I want to make it right," he said, "with the employees. Whatever the legal process determines they're owed, I'm not going to fight it. I've instructed my attorney to cooperate fully with the Labor Department investigation." He folded his hands on the table. "And I want to talk to you about the diner." She had not expected that to be the next sentence. She kept her face even. "What about it?" she said. "I'm 71 years old," Kessler said. "I own 4 properties in Arizona. Mesa Road is the smallest, and it's the furthest from where I live. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been inside that building in over 2 years. That's not how a business should be run." He looked at his hands. "I've been thinking about selling for a while. The events of the last week have clarified things." Ashley's heart rate changed. She was aware of it the way you're aware of weather shifting, a pressure difference, a change in the air. "The building and the business license together," Kessler continued. I had it appraised last year. The number is not small, but I'm also aware that the right person running it is worth more to the community and to the property value than whatever I'd get on the open market from someone who'd turn it into something else. He paused. I want to offer you the first opportunity. Fair market value owner, financing terms we can negotiate. Ashley sat with that for 5 full seconds. I'm a waitress, she said. You're the woman who turned a roadside diner in a town nobody's heard of into a national news story in 72 hours by being decent to 6 people, Kessler said. That's not a waitress. That's someone who understands what a place can be. She thought about her father's house, about the kitchen faucet and the porch steps and 31 years of showing up in one place and making it matter. She thought about Brother's Table, the name that had come out of her before she'd fully formed it, the way the true things always come. I'd need to look at the numbers, she said. Her voice was steady. She was grateful for that. Of course, he said, and I'd want Ramon and Brenda involved. They're part of whatever this is. Kessler nodded without hesitation. That's your call to make. She looked at him for a long moment, reading the room, reading the face, 20 years of watching people across counters and tables learning what was real and what was performance. This was real. She was almost certain, and she had learned to trust almost certain. I'll look at the numbers, she said. 3 months moved quickly after that, the way time moves when it is full of purposeful things. The Labor Department investigation concluded. The findings were exactly what Warren had predicted, and Linda had built the case around systematic, unauthorized wage deductions, improperly disclosed or not disclosed at all, dating back 9 years and touching 11 employees in total, current, and former. Gary Pruitt did not contest the findings. His attorney negotiated a settlement on his behalf that included full restitution to all affected employees' penalties under Arizona wage theft statutes and a permanent bar from serving in any payroll management capacity in the state. He did not appear in public to comment. He simply quietly ceased to be a factor in the story. The back pay settlements were processed in the 8th week. Brenda's check arrived on a Thursday morning. She sat at the counter before her shift opened, the envelope, looked at the number, and then put her reading glasses on and looked at it again, as though the glasses might change what it said. They did not change it. She folded the check back into the envelope, carefully put the envelope in her apron pocket, and said to Ashley, who was watching from 3 feet away, I'm going to finish my shift, and then I'm going to call my daughter, and then I'm going to sit in my car, and I'm going to crib. That sounds like a good plan, Ashley said. Ramon's settlement arrived the same week. He processed it in his characteristic way. He read the number, he nodded once he put it in his wallet, and he went back to the grill. But 20 minutes later, unprompted, he reached through the kitchen window and set a bowl of soup on the counter in front of Ashley. The same way he had on that Wednesday morning that felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. She ate the soup. Teresa called Ashley when her check arrived, and Ashley could hear in her voice was something unwinding. A tension that had been there for so long, it had become structural and was now slowly releasing. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth fighting, Teresa said. I kept telling myself it was too small and too long ago, and nobody would care. A pause. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to believe that then, Ashley said. Things were different then. You changed them, Teresa said. We changed them, Ashley said. You kept the pay stubs. The diner deal closed in the 10th week. The paperwork was real and complicated, and Linda reviewed every page, and Ashley read everything twice the way she should have read things when she was 24, and needed a buy-in, and a man handed her a stack of papers and told her to sign. She signed what she understood and asked questions about what she didn't and did not sign until she had answers. The morning the deal closed, she drove to the diner in the truck, which was running cleanly. Now the knock-on the mechanic from Tucson, having fixed it in 4 hours with a part that cost $60, and an honest assessment that the rest of the engine was solid for at least another 2 years. And she sat in the parking lot for a moment before she went in. She thought about the first time she had pulled into this parking lot. 24-year-old car that ran worse than her current truck, wearing the only blazer she owned for the interview because her father had told her to dress like the job was already hers. Gary Pruitt had hired her on the spot. He had handed her a stack of papers. She had signed. She thought about all the morning since, all the coffee poured, all the orders taken, all the tips divided into 2 piles on the counter of her break table, all the times she had pressed her back against the hallway wall and given herself 30 seconds to feel whatever needed feeling before going back out. She got out of the truck. She went inside. Ramon was at the grill. Brenda was at the counter. Two new staff members hired in the last month, people Ashley had chosen herself. People she had interviewed at the same counter where she'd been interviewed. People she had looked in the eye and asked not just about their experience, but about who they were setting up their sections. She stood in the middle of the floor. Okay, she said to the room to no one in particular and all of them at once. Let's talk about the name. Brenda already knew. Ramon already knew. The two new staff members looked at each other. Brother's table, Brenda said simply. Ashley nodded. The sign went up the following week. A local artist, a woman who had heard the story and called Ashley and offered her services at cost, because that was what Red Mesa had been doing for 3 months, offering what people had to offer at whatever cost they could afford, painted it in clean, readable letters above the door. No flourish, no decoration. The name was enough. Brother's Table. Opening day was a Saturday. 47 days after 485 motorcycles had filled the highway outside the same building. Ashley arrived at 4:30 in the morning, which was 90 minutes before she needed to be there, and she stood in the kitchen alone and looked at everything she had spent years learning and everything she had spent 3 months building, and she breathed, just breathed. She thought about her father. She thought about 31 years in one house, one town, one place. She thought about what it meant to stay, to be the kind of person who stays, who shows up, who keeps showing up, even when showing up costs something. Her father had been that kind of person. She had learned it from him the way children learn the most important things, not through instruction, but through observation, through years of watching someone live a particular way until that way becomes the only way you know how to be. You'd like this, she said to the kitchen. You'd complain about the property taxes and you'd fix the booth by the window yourself, and you'd eat here every morning and tell everyone it was the best diner in Arizona. She paused. You'd be right. She started the coffee. By 7, there was a line outside. By 8, the tables were full and the counter was full, and Ramon was a machine, and Brenda was moving through her section with the authority of someone who knew exactly how much her work was worth now and intended to bring every ounce of it. At 9:45, a sound she recognized began to build from the direction of the highway. That particular layered rumble, low and steady, in multiple building, gradually the way it had built on that Saturday morning, that had changed everything. She looked up from the counter. Through the window, she saw the first headlight, then the next. They came in without announcement, without fanfare, with the same measured, unhurried certainty they had brought the first time. Not 485 today. Closer to 60 the chapters within driving distance, the ones who had said they'd come back and had meant it. Duke Harrison walked through the door. Diane was beside him. Marcus Wings was a step behind, with 2 of the others she now knew by name. They came to the counter the way they always came to the counter, like men who understood that they were guests and intended to behave accordingly. You did it, Duke said. We did it, Ashley said. He looked around the room, at the name on the menu boards, at the corner booth, which was full of a family of 4 parents and 2 young kids, the youngest one making a mess of his eggs in the cheerful, committed way of toddlers everywhere. At the memorial plaque she had mounted near the entrance, a simple bronze plate with Ronnie Delgado's name and the dates of his life in a single line beneath. He rode with people who remembered him here. Duke looked at the plaque for a long time. When he turned back to Ashley, his jaw was set the way it had been in the original booth, holding something together through deliberate effort. But his eyes were clear. He would have liked you, Duke said. I think I would have liked him, she said. She poured 6 coffees without being asked. She set them on the counter. She looked at this room, this ordinary, specific, imperfect room that had cost her everything and given her back more than she had known how to ask for, and she felt the foundation beneath it solid and poured deep, the kind that holds. One act of kindness, one torn receipt, one woman who had decided somewhere in the wreckage of the last 3 years that decency was the one thing left that cost her nothing and had turned out to be the only thing worth everything. She picked up the coffee pot. She went back to work, and Brother's Table was open for business.